So you need to determine your major programs for your single audit. And you know that if you get this right, you're well on your way to doing the single audit engagement correctly. If you get it wrong, it's not good news. So let's look at the 4 steps in determining your major programs. The first step will be to determine what your Type A and Type B thresholds are to identify those Type A and Type B programs. The second step will be to determine your low-risk Type A programs. The third step is to determine your high-risk Type B programs. And then finally, your fourth step will be to determine what your major programs are. Now, the best way to understand these 4 steps is to take a look at an example, and I've prepared one, and so let's walk through this example. So we're looking at the example I prepared in an Excel spreadsheet, and you'll see there's 6 programs here. And the first thing that you need to do before you even start on the 4 steps is to create a list of your programs. So you would like to create a list of each federal program, and that's what this is here. Now you might look back at your CFA from the prior year, your schedule of expenditures, and work that forward. Make sure you've got a complete list of the federal programs for this year. Now, we're looking at these programs, and we see that there's a total of $3,550,000 total federal awards expended in this year. So that's the preliminary step before you begin to do the 4 steps in determining your major programs. We said the first step would be to determine which programs are Type A and which programs are Type B. Now, if you have total federal awards, and that would be this number, expended in the current year of less than $25 million, then your threshold, your Type A threshold, is $750,000. So in this example, we have less than $25 million, so our Type A threshold is $750,000. We see that the first program is $400,000, which is less than the $750,000, so it is a Type B. The second program is more than $750,000, it's Type A, and etc. So we'd work down the list and determine which programs are A-type, which programs are B-type. Once you've done this, then you can move to your second step. Before we do, let me say that if you have a cluster such as student financial aid, that cluster will have several grants within it and several different CFDA numbers within it. But the cluster is treated as one program. So make sure you don't make the mistake of splitting up the cluster. The cluster is one program. So once we determine the Type A and Type Bs, and we've done that in this example, we'll now move to step 2, which is to determine the number of low-risk A programs, low-risk Type A programs. We see that this program at $1 million, we do the risk assessment, and that program had not been audited in the last 2 years, so automatically it's a high-risk program. We see that these other 2 Type A programs, they meet the criteria to be classified as low-risk Type A. And we see that there are 2 low-risk Type A's. Now this is important as we begin to do step 3, And here's wine. Let's go ahead and move into step 3. We're going to determine the number of high-risk type B programs this entity has. Now, the uniform guidance tells us that we must assess the type B programs. We must assess at least 1/4 of the number of type A low-risk programs. Now, that's confusing. So let's look at the example here. We have 2 low-risk type A programs. The uniform guidance says you must assess or find one high-risk type B that equals 25% of the low-risk type A programs. So down in the lower part of this spreadsheet, I have a question. How many type A low-risk programs are there? Well, there's 2. Well, what's the percent to apply? 25%, 1 in 4, and we get a total here of 0.5. So what that means is I must look for one high-risk type B, at least 1/4 of the number of low-risk type A's, at least. And so I'm going to look for at least one high-risk type B. And I go to the top of my list and I look at the first type B program, and lo and behold, I determine that it is high risk because this program is a new program and it also has multiple internal control systems involved. And so I assess this program at high risk. So I have met my requirement to find at least one. I don't need to risk assess any more B programs at that point. If I do, and I find other type Bs that are high risk, and I identify those as high risk, then I must audit those as high risk. In other words, I'm adding more work that I really don't have to do. The requirement is 1/4 of the number of low-risk type A programs. In this example, that means 1, and I have found 1 here. And so I'm done in terms of step 3, which is to identify the high-risk type B programs. Now notice here, program 3, let's pretend for a moment that this is a low risk, the program 1 is low risk, and I go down to look for another high risk program. When I look at this program 3, it's $100,000. Well, I will not risk assess this program. The reason being, it is less than 25% of the type A threshold. So in this example, the type A threshold is $750,000, 25% of that's $187,500, and this number is less than $187,500, so I will not risk assess that type B program. And then to continue with the example, if we said for a moment that this first program is low risk, then I would go here and I would risk assess program 6. But to go back where we originally started, we said this is high risk and I'm done. And so I will not risk assess program 3 and I will not risk assess program 6. So at this point, I have 2 major programs. One type A high-risk program, so it's major. I have one high-risk type B, so it's major. And now let's go to the 4th step, which is to determine the major programs. Well, I've really largely done step 4 already. I just did it. So I see that I have two major programs, and those two programs equal $1.4 million. So in step 4, you want to compare the major programs you've identified to the total federal awards. And if those programs, if the total of those major programs exceed the low auditee threshold, then you're done. So down here I've got 20%, and we're pretending in this example that we have a low risk auditee. And so the percent to apply is 20%. 20% of the total federal awards is $710,000. So if my major programs are greater than the $710,000, I'm done. If by chance the major programs identified are less than the 710, then I would need to pick another program to get me above the 20% or above the 710,000. As you can see, this process is quite complicated. But again, those 4 steps to identify the major programs are to determine your Type A and Type B programs. That's the first step. Second step is to determine the number of low-risk Type A programs. The third step is to determine the number of high-risk Type B programs. And then step 4, determine the number of major programs, or identify the major programs before you go and do your test work. Now, once you determine what the major programs are, and in this example it's programs 1 and 2, that's where I'm going to focus my time in performing this single audit. These are the 2 programs that I will test for compliance. So in the single audit report, I am giving an opinion on compliance that, for this entity, that it has complied with the federal requirements for programs 1 and program 2. I'm also looking at the internal controls that relate to each of these programs. I don't give an opinion on those controls, but I still am required to test those controls for each major program. So I'm sorry it's so complicated, but that's how you determine your major programs for your single audit. Hope that helps.